In 1990, a rebel group called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, launched a war to overthrow the government in Rwanda, a small landlocked country in East Africa. The leader of the RPF was a man named Paul Kagame. He was Tutsi, an ethnic minority that had historically been marginalized by the ruling class. The Hutu, the war lasted for years and ended with the total defeat of the Rwandan army and the escape of its president into exile. However, this would not be the end of the conflict. The Tutsi victory led to the return of many refugees who had fled to neighboring countries during the war. But tensions between the Hutu and the Tutsi remained high. As the newly installed Tutsi government attempted to integrate the two groups together, a series of attacks against both sides erupted across the country. Then on April 6, 1994, something terrible happened. President Habyarimana of Rwanda was assassinated when his plane was shot down while attempting to land in Kigali, the capital city. And blame for the attack quickly fell on the Tutsis. Within hours, extremist Hutu groups began attacking Tutsi civilians, killing thousands of them in cold blood. This violence spread like wildfire, and soon it became clear that a full-scale genocide was underway. Over the course of the next 3 months, some 800,000 people were hacked to death with machetes by their neighbors and fellow citizens. A nation was utterly decimated. But why does any of this matter? Why should we care about this horrible event from the past? If we are honest, such atrocities seem distant from us. They don't seem relevant to our daily lives. But the Rwandan genocide is much more than just a historical event. It is a story about human nature, about what can happen when hatred and fear take hold of a society. It is a warning for us to learn from the past, so that we can better understand the present and build a better future. This is the worst crime in human history. This is the Rwanda Genocide. The African continent has a long and complex history. Before the modern era, it was home to hundreds of different societies with unique cultures and traditions. However, in the 15th century, the slave trade began to transform the continent forever. European powers, including Portugal, Britain, and France, came to Africa to exploit its resources and people. Millions of Africans were captured and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to work on plantations in the Americas. The slave trade would have a devastating impact on Africa. It weakened many societies and left deep scars that would last for centuries. But despite these challenges, Africa continued to be a cradle of civilization. During this time period, the Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power, controlling vast territories from North Africa to Southeast Asia to maintain control over their empire. The Ottomans used a variety of methods to suppress rebellions. In Algeria, they employed a system of military garrisons to keep the population under control. Meanwhile, in Egypt, they built massive prisons to hold political prisoners. These tactics were effective but brutal, and they left a lasting impact on the people they ruled over. Meanwhile, the Tokugawa shogunate was in full swing in Japan. They sought to unify the country under a single government and impose strict social and cultural norms. They implemented a system of hereditary castes to maintain social order and ban many forms of foreign influence. Under their rule, Japan became one of the most isolated countries in the world. Finally, in South America, the Spanish colonies were undergoing a period of significant change. The discovery of silver in the region led to a population boom and economic growth. But this wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, and the vast majority of the population lived in poverty. Tensions between the rich and poor were high, and there were frequent rebellions against the colonial government. The Rwandan genocide is often seen as a product of the legacy of colonialism. The Belgians ruled Rwanda with an iron fist, exploiting the country's natural resources and oppressing its people. They also played a role in creating the conditions that led to the genocide itself. The Belgians favored the Tutsi minority, giving them better access to education and other opportunities. This created resentment among the Hutu majority, which ultimately contributed to the outbreak of violence. But colonialism is only one piece of the puzzle. There are other factors that must be taken into account, such as the role of ethnicity, religion, and power. Rwanda is a small country located in the heart of Africa. For centuries, it was home to a diverse range of ethnic groups, including the Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa. The Hutu were the largest group, followed by the Tutsi, who were traditionally pastoralists and had a closer relationship with the colonial government. The Belgians used the Tutsi as intermediaries to collect taxes and enforce their policies, which further exacerbated tensions with the Hutu. As the 20th century began, Rwanda was still a part of German East Africa. But after World War I, it was divided between Belgium and Germany. Belgium was given control of Rwanda and Burundi, while Germany retained control of Tanzania. Under Belgian rule, Rwanda became a Belgian colony known as Rwanda Burundi. The Belgians exploited the country's natural resources and forced the Tutsi minority to work in their service. The Tutsi were treated as a separate race by the Belgians and were given preferential treatment in education and other areas. This created tension with the Hutu majority, who resented the Tutsi and the Belgian authorities. By the 1950s, the desire for independence was growing in Rwanda. Both the Hutu and Tutsi groups wanted to end Belgian rule and establish their own government. However, they disagreed on the form that independence would take. The Hutu extremists demanded complete independence and an end to the Tutsi monarchy. Meanwhile, the Tutsi moderates wanted to keep the Tutsi king and maintain close ties with Belgium. In 1959, the Hutu extremists launched a revolution that resulted in the overthrow of the Tutsi monarchy and the establishment of a new Hutu-led government. Thousands of Tutsi fled to neighboring countries including Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and Congo. The new Hutu government was unstable and faced opposition from both the Tutsi refugees and the Belgian colonial authorities. In 1961, a referendum was held in Rwanda to determine the country's future. The Hutu majority voted for independence from Belgium, and the Tutsi monarchy was officially abolished. The country was renamed Rwanda and became a republic within the Commonwealth of Nations. The 1960s and 1970s were a turbulent time in Rwanda's history. The country was still recovering from the effects of colonialism and the recent revolution. The economy was devastated, and there was widespread poverty and instability. The Hutu government was unable to effectively govern the country and maintain order. There were frequent outbreaks of violence between the Hutu and Tutsi communities, and the country became a hotbed of regional conflicts. The situation was further complicated by the presence of foreign powers in the region, such as Belgium, who still had interest in Rwanda and were reluctant to let go. In 1973, a group of Tutsi soldiers launched a coup and overthrew the Hutu government. They established a new military regime led by General Juvenal Habyarimana. The new regime was repressive and undemocratic. They cracked down on any opposition to their rule and maintained a tight grip on the country. This created a climate of fear and resentment among the population, which would later contribute to the outbreak of the genocide. By the late 1980s, the situation in Rwanda had become increasingly unstable. The economy was in sharp decline and there was growing discontent with the Habyarimana regime. In October 1989, a rebel group known as the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, launched an invasion of Rwanda from neighboring Uganda. The RPF was primarily composed of Tutsi refugees who had fled to Uganda during the 1960s and 70s. They were well trained and equipped and made significant gains against the Rwandan army. The war quickly escalated, and by 1990, it was clear that the Rwandan army was unable to defend the country. In November 1990, Habyarimana agreed to a ceasefire with the RPF, and negotiations began in earnest. The goal was to end the war and find a peaceful solution to the conflict. However, the talks were deadlocked, and no agreement could be reached. Tensions continued to rise, and sporadic fighting broke out across the country. The situation was becoming increasingly volatile, and it was clear that a compromise was needed. In early 1993, a peace agreement was finally reached between the Rwandan government and the RPF. The agreement provided for a power-sharing government that would include members of both the Hutu and Tutsi communities. It also provided for the return of Tutsi refugees from neighboring countries. The agreement was seen as a positive step towards ending the conflict in Rwanda. It was hoped that the new government would be able to bring stability and peace to the country. However, the fragile peace did not last long. On April 6, 1994, a plane carrying Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana was shot down as it approached Kigali International Airport. The plane was hit by a surface-to-air missile, and both Habyarimana and the presidents of Burundi and Rwanda were killed. The immediate aftermath of the attack was chaos. It was unclear who was responsible for shooting down the plane, and the Rwandan government quickly blamed the Tutsi rebels. This sparked a wave of violence against Tutsis across the country. Thousands of Tutsis were hacked to death by Hutu extremists, and the violence quickly spiraled out of control. Within days, the entire country was engulfed in a bloody genocide. The RPF responded to the attacks by launching a full-scale invasion of Rwanda. They quickly made significant gains, and by mid-July, they had captured the capital city of Kigali. The Hutu government collapsed, and Hutu extremists fled to neighboring countries such as Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. The RPF victory marked the end of the war and the beginning of a new era in Rwanda. The seeds of the genocide were planted long before the first machetes flashed in the sun. It was the result of a perfect storm of factors: ethnicity, ideology, power struggles, and colonial legacy. The Hutus and Tutsis had been at odds for decades, and the Belgian colonial government had exacerbated the divide by favoring the Tutsis. When the Tutsis gained power in 1959, the Hutus were marginalized, and this created a climate of resentment that would eventually boil over. The assassination of President Habyarimana was the spark that ignited the firestorm. And within days, the entire country was consumed by violence. But the international community could have done more to prevent the genocide. The United Nations had a peacekeeping force in Rwanda at the time, but it was ill-equipped and underfunded. When the violence began, the UN was slow to respond, and this allowed the Hutu extremists to carry out their horrific campaign. The Rwandan genocide was a tragedy on a massive scale. An estimated 800,000 people were killed in just 3 months. Entire families were wiped out, and the country was left in ruins. The physical and emotional scars of the genocide are still visible today. Many survivors live in poverty, and the trauma of the genocide continues to affect Rwandans. Despite the horrors of the genocide, the Rwandan people have shown incredible resilience. They have rebuilt their country from the ashes, and they have worked to heal the wounds of the past. The Rwandan government has also made efforts to promote justice and reconciliation. It has established a tribunal to prosecute those responsible for the genocide, and has launched a national campaign to promote unity and reconciliation. In the aftermath of the genocide, the international community made a collective pledge to never again allow such atrocities to occur. The UN Security Council passed a resolution establishing the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which has prosecuted many of the masterminds behind the genocide. The international community also established the International Court of Justice to hold those responsible accountable. And individual countries such as Canada and Spain have prosecuted Rwandan nationals for their role in the genocide. In addition to the legal and judicial efforts, there have also been significant efforts to promote peace and reconciliation in Rwanda. The Rwandan government has implemented a policy of genocide denial, which aims to promote unity and reconciliation between the Hutu and Tutsi communities. This has included public education campaigns, memorials, and museums dedicated to the victims of the genocide, and initiatives to promote dialogue and understanding between the two communities. The Rwandan genocide was a dark chapter in human history, but it is a reminder of the importance of tolerance, compassion, and the need to stand up against injustice. The Rwandan people have shown incredible strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy, and their story is an inspiration to us all. It's important to remember that the Rwandan genocide was not just a distant event. It was a tragedy that unfolded just a few generations ago, and the scars of the genocide are still visible today. We must remember the victims of the genocide and honor their memory by working to create a better world. We must also be vigilant against the dangers of extremism and intolerance, and stand up for justice and equality for all.